Oh, y'all, like less than 20 pages or less than 30 pages. So we're on this chapter called Sarcoma. So that last chapter was that crazy girl, the I think the girl that killed Haeon. The post symposium dinner was held at a nearby barbecue restaurant. All the participants filed in one after another to sit at the tables that had been put together in a long line. I ended up somewhere in the middle with my back against the wall. As soon as the server brought over the side dishes and place settings, everyone became busy collecting their cutlery and plates. I wiped my hands with a hot towel and watched the graduate student place pork belly strips on the hot grill. The evening news was playing on the television hanging on the opposite wall as I mixed the dipping sauce for the meat. A word that the news anchor said pierced through the clamor and fixed itself into my mind. I raised my head. On the screen was a skater racing around an oval ice rink. In a sober voice, the anchor announced that an athlete on the national short track team had passed away from osteosarcoma of the shoulder. This cancer, which was discovered while he was being treated for an elbow injury, is called sarcoma or osteosarcoma. Sarcoma, though the word was unfamiliar, was something I'd heard maybe once before. How did I even know it? I sank into thought when everything grew quiet. I glanced around to find all eyes on me. My thesis advisor, who was seated diagonally across from me, seemed to have asked me something. When I looked to the lecturer sitting next to me, he prompted, "What will you have to drink?" I picked up my shot glass and held it out toward my advisor. Once it was filled, we clinked glasses together. I realized then that my midterm thesis defense was coming up, and in that instant, a memory slithered upon my belly like a snake: the National Library in Daeon. It must have been in the middle of November of last year. I ran into Daeon in front of the lockers on the ground floor of the library. "Sangwi Yanni," she called. If she hadn't called out to me, I probably wouldn't have recognized her. It had been 10 years since I'd seen her last on the steps of the university library. 10 years was a long time, but still Daeon's transformation was so drastic I couldn't help being shocked. She now had glasses and short curly hair, and she put on a lot of weight. She was wearing a parka the color of eggplant with black trousers, but the large parka was lumpy, as if it had been stuffed with real eggplants. And because she was in sneakers, she seemed to have gotten shorter. At a glance, she appeared 3 or 4 years older than me, but close up, her makeup, skin was bright and rosy. I might have been able to recognize her more easily if I hadn't run into her outside the university library. After all, it wouldn't have been a stretch to accept that high school Daeon, who had looked like a country girl, had become someone resembling a country woman, if the bizarre image of the girl in the yellow dress hadn't been wedged in between. But why had Daeon brought up sarcoma that day? I tried to recall the context, but everything was a haze. I couldn't remember talking about the disease at all, but in my mind I could still see the serious expression on Daeon's face as she uttered the word sarcoma, as she told me about someone's diagnosis. As people drank, the restaurant grew increasingly noisy. I couldn't hear the television at all, despite the fact that the volume was turned up high. Someone complained it was too loud and used an app on their phone to turn off the television, but it was still noisy and I could no longer think of anything else. It was only on the subway on my way home that I managed to recall most of the details from the last time I'd run into Daeon. That day I had to go to the National Library to photocopy some research material I needed for my thesis. I put my bag in a locker and was about to step through the entrance gate when I realized I hadn't brought my wallet. I went back to the locker and rummaged through my bag, but my wallet wasn't there. I'd forgotten it at home. Flustered, I was searching through the pockets of my coat when someone called, saying, "Wee, Yanni, what are you looking for?" Deanna asked, picking up as if we'd seen each other only the day before. I told her I left my wallet at home. "As long as he didn't lose it," she said. She pulled out her wallet thinking I needed money. "It's not that," I said. "My library card's in my wallet. Then you could just ask for a day pass. It'll be ready right away." Again, I told her it wasn't that. I needed an ID card to get a day pass, and my ID card was also in my wallet. "Oh, I see," Dawn said with a loud ringing laugh. I couldn't help being surprised once more. "Why do you have to go to the library? Can I help with anything?" "Actually, I need to photocopy some things. I can do it for you." "Well, it's a bit complicated to find the material." "Then do you want to just take my library card and copy everything yourself?" What she suggested was indeed the best possible option. If you scan your card when entering the library, you didn't need to go to the process of verifying your identity. This obviously was the most convenient arrangement for me, but I felt bad. However, Dawn assured me it was no problem and handed me her library card. "Then I'll be back as soon as I'm done copying everything. Do you want to go wait somewhere comfortable? I'll be in the lounge on this floor. Take your time." And so I took Dawn's library card and went inside. When I returned with the copies, Dawn was standing by the lounge window, talking on the phone. I overheard a name that sounded familiar. It would have been better not to have heard it at all. In a voice brimming with happiness, I heard her ask, "How's Hyun, mother?" It sounded as if she said, "How's Haeon?" Hyun and Haeon, the names sounded clearly identical. "Oh, really?" Daeon said with a loud laugh. Oh, that's her daughter. "Oh, really?" Daeon said with a loud laugh. I backed away, though I had no intention of eavesdropping. I somehow felt I needed to hide the fact that I heard. A vague but certain fear crept over me. When she finished her conversation and glanced back, I was able to approach her from a safe distance. "You're done?" she asked with a smile. "Thanks to you," I said as I handed back her library card. After sitting here for a while, I started feeling a little weird. That's what she says. At her words, I glanced at the sofas placed around the lounge. Most of the people there were elderly men with a sober, dignified bearing, gravelly voices that sounded a little short of breath, a musty odor with a subtle whiff of aftershave, and the tense smell of instant coffee mix filled the air. Dayon launched into several amusing anecdotes, for example, about the tactic of one old man, always respectably dressed, who pretends to stumble and then cuts in front of a young people in the cafeteria line so that he can nab the food tray with the biggest serving of his favorite side dish. Or the arguments that break out sometimes among the elderly men and the assert claims they each make, or the pointless disputes that would drag on until some random patriotic conclusion would decide everything at once. All the stories were of this sort. For some reason, they didn't sit well with me. It sounds like you come here often, I said, trying to change the subject. You could say that. I realized I'd only met Dayon at either the literary club or the library, at spaces that had to do with language. Are you studying for something? I asked her. No, I'm trying to write something. Write what? Poetry? She's asking, write what? Poetry? Dayon shook her head. No, Iani, not poetry. I can write poems. No, Iani. I guess that means sister. Not poetry. I can write poems. She hesitated, registering the questioning look in my eyes. Then a moment later, later she said, I guess I'm writing something like a confession. I guess I'm writing something like a confession. Or she's saying that. She said, I guess I'm writing something like a confession. Before I could say anything more, she took up the subject of the elderly men again, their stubbornness, their irritability, their obsession over minor details, their blurting of certain words as if supplied by a built-in mechanism, their tendency to move in perfect order like birds flying in formation. I swear this place is more like a museum than a library, Dayon said, biting her lip. The word museum made me think of taxidermy specimens, which then made me recall the shrouded body of my father. Without thinking, I mumbled, if my father was still alive, he would have become one of these men for sure. Your father passed away, Dayon asked, surprised. From liver cancer in the spring 2 years ago, I said briefly. Shortly after, I talked about the combativeness that had defined his life, how suffocated I felt by his narrow-mindedness. Because of him, I had gone to teacher's college and become a teacher, and after he passed away, I quit my teaching job and entered graduate school. I never hated my father for these reasons, but I also never loved him either. Shortly after, I talked about the combativeness that defined his life, how suffocated I felt by his narrow-mindedness. Because of him, I had gone to teacher's college and become a teacher, and after he passed away, I quit my teaching job and entered graduate school. I never hated my father for these reasons, but also never loved him. And that still confuses me, I said. After I said these words, I grew even more confused. It seemed there was nothing different about the way I viewed my father until now from the way down I viewed these elderly men in the lounge. Still, I felt uncomfortable listening to her prick apart their very action. Every action. Had my father been like these men? Was that all he'd been? It's natural to feel confused by these things you can't change, Dayon said like a wise sage. You think, I remembered vaguely. Death carves a clear line between the dead and the living, she said in a solemn tone. The dead are over there and the rest of us are over here. When someone dies, no matter how great they were, it's like drawing a permanent line between that person and the rest of humanity. If birth means begging to join the side of the living, then death has the power to kick everyone out. That's why I think death, with its power to sever things forever, is far more objective, more dignifying than birth, which is the starting point of everything. Dayon spoke calmly as if she were reading from a book. Dayon had walked this path for a long time. She had mulled over these thoughts until no roof edges remained, to the extent that her views on death seemed more terrifying, more resigned than ones held by those on death's doorstep. Death turns us into junk. Into the blink of an eye, we become meaningless like scraps. As soon as I heard this, I thought of Haeyeon when I recalled her beauty, which had turned us into scraps in an instant. A beauty so staggering, I found myself wondering if it had actually existed. My heart surged. Some people have that effect on others, even when they are alive. For example, I hesitated for a moment and said her name. Haeyeon, your sister. When we were with her, we were just scraps. We were nothing. Dayon smiled. It was closer to a grimace like the one I had seen on her face at the library cafe a long time ago. Sangui Iani, did I ever tell you we changed my sister's name? When I told her she hadn't, she explained that Haeyeon had originally been named Haeyoon, but our dad. I tried my best to pay attention to what she was saying, but I couldn't. What I overheard Dayon saying on the phone kept ringing in my ears. How's Haeyoon, mother? Had she said Haeyoon or Haeyeon? Haeyeon, mother. I realized Dayon was staring at me. In order to appear as though I were listening, I nodded. Our mother still thinks that, believe it or not, she said and closed her mouth. I didn't know what her mother still thought, but one thing was clear. In the lives of both Dayon and her mother, there was now a different Haeyoon or Haeyeon, and I couldn't help but finding this fact chilling. The talk about Sarcoma didn't come up in the lounge. We each got our bags from from the lockers and headed out of the building. Dayon said she wanted to have a cigarette, so we walked towards the benches in the smoking area. When I asked her if she was free, saying that I wanted to treat her to dinner, she agreed readily. Do you drink? I asked. Of course, she said with a laugh. Then I'll buy you a drink too. She laughed again. She seemed to be saying, you go ahead and do that and I'll keep laughing. It was nice to see her in a lighthearted mood, but I felt depressed all the same. While Dayon had a cigarette, I couldn't stop thinking of the other Hyun or Haeyeon she had mentioned on the phone. I don't know why Yoon Tae-rim suddenly came to mind just then. Maybe it was because Dayon had asked me 10 years ago if I kept in touch with Tae-rim. I told her then that I sometimes saw her at the alumni meetups. Dayon had asked for my number then, but she hadn't called once after that, not even to request young Tae-rim's contact information. Dayon finished his cigarette and lit another one. When smoking became banned in many public spaces, more and more people began to smoke several cigarettes at once, one after another. When had Dayon started smoking? Did she want Tae-rim's phone number, perhaps? I hadn't seen Tae-rim for a long time, but she got married to Shin Jeon-jun. She had shown up to pass out wedding invitations, but she never returned after that. We believed it was because she resented us, since none of us had attended her wedding. Dayon looked like she was enjoying her cigarette. A few years after Tae-rim's wedding, I heard at another alumni meetup that her baby girl had been abducted. It was no rumor, it was the truth. The babysitter had taken the baby for a short walk in the stroller, but when she returned to the apartment, the baby was gone. How had she failed to notice that the baby was missing while she pushed the stroller home? She said she had no idea. The canopy had been pulled down and the stroller hadn't felt any lighter. The bottom storage basket had been loaded with baby things, and she just hung a shopping bag filled with milk, fruit, and juice she'd bought at the organic store on the handle. After retracing the babysitter's steps, the police identified their organic store as the most likely location where the kidnapping had taken place. The babysitter had parked the stroller at the end of the counter in the corner and bickered a little with an employee. So basically said, let me read that again. She said she had no idea the canopy had been pulled down and the stroller hadn't felt any lighter. I'm thinking, did the mom and Daeyoon steal the baby? Or did that crazy lady, get rid of her kid because she seen the husband crying with the baby, like something's wrong with her? I don't know. The bottom storage basket had been loaded with the baby things, and she'd hung a shopping bag filled with milk, fruit, and juice she'd bought at the organic store on the handle. It makes me think about my daughter, because Alwyn, when you look at these in the future, when you look at this, because you are gonna, I'm your father, you can be interested in, seeing what your father liked to read, or just a lot of these books are new to me and came to me, or just what your father read, stories that he read, and some interesting stories, I guess, the books that I'm going to be reading. And who knows, Alwyn may not even ever watch any of these books or ever go back, because she's my child, and maybe she'll be in the business with me of reading books out loud and stuff like that, because I read books and put them online. So but what I'm saying is, like, because one time I accidentally dropped my daughter at McDonald's, and my baby mother actually has a video online. She has a video on, if Alan, when you ever come across this, Aloe, you have a video online of you, we're at McDonald's and you fall. You're like, we're like at McDonald's and you accidentally fall because I took the weight off the stroller. Or actually, I put too much weight on the stroller. So you're in the stroller and, like, you think you fell backwards and your mom got you. You were such a small baby. I love you, Aloe. It was an accident. And I thought about and it makes me, I pause for a second thinking about all the stupid shit, all the unappreciative shit I've done in my life. And things that kind of make me, like, put me in the position where I'm at now, where it's kind of like, I gotta protect my state of mind. I know life is more like just kind of focusing on what things you like to do and growing a business and trying to get to a place of where you could be comfortable in open settings, and you could kind of, like, you kind of want to you see what life really is, and how, like, you need to have a good name and you need to get along with people, because things that you do as a child affects who you become as an adult. It's like these thoughts that you have in your head, these bitternesses, these regrets could weigh heavily on you, and they do weigh heavily on you, and, like, being sad and being hurt and not really realizing who you are, and that pain you ended up using for something like, it sounds like that dude walking right here, like right here. It's like, bro, what are you doing right here, bro? Is he like a peeping Tom, bro? Is he bored? Or maybe is he listening to me? heard somebody cough like right by the fence, you know? Like, bro, that was just weird. Cause I know his mobile home, or the guy's trailer is like way back there. But all I'm saying is that, you know, yeah, but my daughter falling and things of that nature, you know, I was like just feeling guilty about it. But then I was like, what was I thinking before that, you know? Before I was like, oh, fucking anxious because of that. Like, I love my daughter, you know. I don't want nothing to affect her, you know. These books are good to read, you know. They help me. They help me reading and be like it's like kind of therapeutic. You hear some of the mystery and the murders and all that. I'm talking about more of the like how it talks about who you are as a person, how to handle situations, and you know, shit like that. But books are ultimately good, you know. The reader wrote a book. There's always like a lesson in it, things of that nature. But yeah, don't be mad when you see that. I'm pretty sure because Alaman's mom doesn't put a lot of videos up on her page, but so Alaman would probably be able to find that on her mom's page where she falls. And I'm saying this like in a chapter of a book I read, so I don't know if she's ever gonna come across it. But if she ever does, I hope she just knows that I love her. And it was funny. But as a kid, because I was mad, like, not a kid, I wasn't even a kid, it was a couple years ago. I don't know why I said that, but I guess it just goes back to my childish mentality or my lack of knowledge, or I don't know. But I don't know, I love her. I love my daughter, despite the shit that I've done, you know. After retracing the babysitter's steps, the police identified the organic store as the most likely location where the kidnapping had taken place. Oh, I'm talking about what, like, things that I've done in life. It's just, yeah, mistakes that people make in life, but nothing to my daughter's fine, you know. I mean, like any parent, I've lost patience. I might have yelled at her, you know, but I never harmed her seriously. But we know we're not gonna do nothing, but she's uncertain sometimes, you know. That she's like, well, shit, if he hit me once, he might, you know. They're kind of nervous and scared, you know. Yeah, the parent, you don't really know how to feel about that. I mean, if I tie my daughter up, lock her in her room, beating down her confidence all day, not feeding her, and things like that, that's, you know, sexually assaulting your child. Things like that, those are serious alarms. But I love my daughter. She's supposed to come over today. It's the day before New Year's. But yeah, I had to clarify all that because, I don't know, felt a little, I just glad I clarified it. But so now I'm gonna start reading again. The middle of 133. The babysitter had parked the stroller at the end of the counter in the corner and bickered a little with an employee. So basically, said an alumna, drawing a line on the table with her finger, say this is the counter and this is here is the rest of the store. She then jabbed the corner near one end of the line and said she parked the stroller around here. Because the security camera was pointing toward the counter on the customer side, the area right behind the camera was a blind spot. The alumna said it must have been at the moment that someone took the baby from the stroller. Right then I became overcome with a strange sense of deja vu. I couldn't block out the memory of kids drawing sketches and scrawling numbers on the chalkboard after Haeyeon had died, each trying to figure out whether Shin Jae-jun or Hamanu was the culprit. That I think of Tae-rim now because of the sense of deja vu, because Daeon had asked last time if I still talked to her. Daeon stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray and asked, Yanni, do you believe in God? God, I repeated, I don't think so. How about you? Not yet. Does that mean you might believe later? No, she said, I want to believe, but I can't. How can I when things I can't possibly understand are happening all over the world? Just as she had in the library lounge when she talked about the elderly people, she started firing off examples I could barely get the gist of. For example, somewhere in the world, a girl is born. She's born into a family so poor she often goes hungry. She's beaten, rummages through garbage for food, gets sick, and goes blind. When she's 11 years old, she's gang raped, stabbed repeatedly, and murdered. Then her body is thrown out in the same garbage dump where she's rummaged for food her whole life. How can you believe in God after that? She's beaten. For example, somewhere in the world, a girl is born poor. She's born into a family so poor she often goes hungry. She's beaten, rummages through the garbage for food, gets sick, and goes blind. When she's 11 years old, she's gang raped, stabbed repeatedly, and murdered. Then her body is thrown out in the same garbage dump where she's rummaged for food her whole life. How can you believe in a God after that? At first I didn't understand why Dayon was telling me this, but I became fascinated the more I listened. It wasn't what she talked about that I found fascinating, it was her tone, her attitude. I sensed a terrible loneliness, not just because Dayon appeared lonely, but because she seemed to be in a state of extreme isolation. Either by choice or by force, she had become completely cut off from everyone. Dayon took a deep breath as if trying to calm herself and went on. Here's another example. Somewhere in the world, a boy is born as the eldest son in a poor family. He has a mother with dwarfism and a young sister, and since there's no money for new shoes, he drags his feet. Okay, Dayon took a deep breath as if trying to calm herself and went on. Here's another example. Somewhere in the world, a boy is born as the eldest son in a poor family. He has a mother with dwarfism and a younger sister, and since there's no money for new shoes, he drags his feet because he has to fold down the backs of his small toes. From the time he's 11, he needs to work while attending school to make some extra money. Then at the age of 18, he's falsely accused of murder, beaten by the police, blamed by everyone, and kicked out of school. When he starts his military service, he is diagnosed with sarcoma. This is when I heard the word for the first time. Has his leg amputated and gets out of military on a disability discharge. He starts working at a laundry plant, is badly burned as a presser, and discovers that his sarcoma has spread to his lungs and then dies at the age of 29. How can anyone call this divine providence? I could sense that DA had desperately wanted to confide in someone for a long time, but something was holding her back and she could only brood on the periphery of that subject. Unless we can confidently say that everything is divine providence, even when the watchtower burns down and the ship sinks, we can't say we believe in God. I can never say all this divine providence, not in a million years. It's not providence, it's ignorance. We should be saying everything is divine ignorance, that it's God who doesn't know, that it's God who doesn't know. Right then, Dayon's cell phone rang. She checked the incoming number and stood up from the bench. I sensed she wanted some privacy. She moved off far enough so that she wouldn't be heard and talked on the phone with her back turned to me. The words Dayon had spewed weren't all nonsense. The words Dayon had spewed weren't all nonsense. They hinted at something gleaming faintly. And at the age of 18, he's falsely accused of murder. Could she have meant, before I could remember his name, the opening words of the song came to mind. Han Manuin, I sang. This life full of misery, that's right, Han Manu. Had she been talking about him, the boy who'd been in my grade? Was he the one who had died from sarcoma at the age of 29? Sorry, Yanni, Dayon said, after she'd hung up. I really wish we could have dinner together at least once, but I have to go. Something's come up. But judging from Dayon's bright expression, whatever had happened didn't seem like bad news. Maybe you don't believe in God, Dayon said, with a playful smile. But how about poetry? You believe in poetry, right? Of course, I said, smiling. I wanted to tell Dayon a story about my mother I just remembered. After my father passed away, my mother would often say as she skimmed the hardened fat off the top of the short rib soup or soy sauce braised beef, if the fat didn't rise to the top, your father would have passed away a lot earlier. I wanted to tell Dayon a story about my mother I just remembered. After my father passed away, my mother would often say as she skimmed the hardened fat off the top of the short rib soup or soy sauce braised beef, if the fat didn't rise to the top, your father would have passed away a lot earlier. If the fat didn't rise to the top, what's that supposed to mean, Dayon asked. It was her way of saying she missed him, like what the song says, if the sea was land, there would be no goodbyes or crying at the dock. At my words, laughter burst from Dayon's mouth, high and clear like the bell of a bicycle. Mothers really are something, don't you think? It's probably the most honest mourning I ever heard. To skim the fat for someone she never skimped on. To skim the fat and never skimped on. I told you you're a poet. We had a good laugh and got to our feet as if we just remembered something. We waved goodbye to each other as though we were going to see each other again the next day. I wasn't able to ask her anything, not where she lived, not her phone number. Even if I'd asked, she probably wouldn't have told me. Afterward, I went to the National Library regularly and decided I might as well work on my thesis there. I looked for Dayon each time, but despite what she said about going there often, she was nowhere to be seen. Then one day it came to me after I'd run into Dayon, she'd never come back to the library, and never again would she come back, even in the future. There'd be no reason for her to have a cigarette near the benches in the smoking area. She said she wished we could have had dinner together at least once. At the time, my head had been filled with thoughts of Yun, Tae-rim, and Han Manu, and so I didn't pay much attention to what she said, but when I think back, she was telling me she had no intention of ever seeing me again. At least once, in other words, never again. Dayon was avoiding me, not just me, but anyone who knew about the incident from long ago. As she should. She would not want to be cut off from the rest of the world. She would want to be cut off from the rest of the world to be forgotten. Is that why she had gained weight, put on glasses, and concealed herself in a large parka the color of eggplant as she meant to hide herself in a cocoon, in case someone might recognize her? As I got off the subway, I told myself that all these thoughts might be ridiculous, baseless speculations, but if they weren't, if my hunch turned out to be true, what happened in the summer of the Korean-Japan World Cup wasn't over, and it never will be. It will go on endlessly until the end of Daeon's life, or maybe beyond that. Not being able to put an end to an incident so horrific, I couldn't begin to imagine the kind of weight on life. Okay, so, but if they weren't, if my hunch turned out to be true, what happened in the summer of Korea-Japan World Cup wasn't over. But if they weren't, if my hunch turned out to be true, what happened in the summer of the Korea-Japan World Cup wasn't over, and it never will be. It will go on endlessly until the end of Daeon's life, or maybe beyond that. Not being able to put an end to an incident so horrific, I couldn't begin to imagine that kind of weight on a life. Okay, at first, so I thought she was talking about how, so I think they're specifically talking about that was the incident that happened, what had happened in the summer of the Korea-Japan World Cup wasn't over. I believe she's talking about specifically that was when her sister died. But then there was a time where even if they talked about soccer and stuff, she would just think back to the World Cup, and then that's the season in the summer when her sister died. So I'm thinking about that too, like that's kind of related to like and then this is pretty much what the writer's saying, which is so brilliant. They will not be able to put an end to the incident, meaning she's going to carry that with her forever, pretty much. I think she was talking about metaphorically and psychologically and socially, you know, and just in your head. I don't think she really meant physically. So that was the end of that chapter. So we have a really small chapter of like 6 pages after this.